Welcome to the Dialogue Book Report, where we talk about literature of interest to LDS readers. I'm Andrew Hall, an editor at Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought, coming to you from Fukuoka, Japan. And today I'm joined by two of the authors of a new collection of stories. Nicole Goldberg, our authors are Nicole Goldberg and Mattathias Singh, and the stories that they wrote are Tales of the Chelm First Ward. So, Nicole, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
And Mattathias, welcome.
Thank you.
So, would one of you first tell us the basic idea, the structure of this book? How does it work?
I think it's best to think of this book as the story of a ward. That it's a series of interconnected stories rather than a novel that has, a definite climax and denouement and those kinds of things. There are a lot of really great characters that you meet throughout, and that makes it more of a story of a people together rather than the story of a person. And so there are a lot of really great characters that we meet throughout that you may recognize from your own ward, like Mirla Schwartz, who is a perfectionist in her own right, who feels like she needs to be more than what God requires of her for her calling. There's Shmuel Peretz, who is turning 8 years old, and he has decided that he's got one more day to sin because the next day he'll be accountable. And I think we've all kind of known kids like that. We had Sipa, who is newly married, well, not too newly married, but finds that she's having a hard time conceiving and getting pregnant, and feels that if she follows the teachings of the family proclamation to a T, that maybe she will get those blessings. And in the same way, Banish, as he pays tithing, feels that if he pays tithing on the increase of his weight, he will also pay tithing to lose that weight that he has increased. So they're different but familiar characters that we run into all throughout.
So these are comic stories, clearly from your description.
Yeah,
common, but with the real touch of reality of feeling what's going on in a church community like this. So,
well, I think it's fair to call it satirical, but it's a gentle satire. And it's not biting, it's not critical. It's to play around with, the logic of Chelm and what, the old stories tell in the context of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Part of the challenge that we wanted to address is that humor about the church can often feel like an attack to members who are committed, and this is a very significant, meaningful part of their lives. And humor can often feel like it's coming from outside and criticizing the things that they hold most dear. And so we wanted to find a way to engage with humor, with LDS life in a way that would feel welcoming rather than attacking.
And I think you can feel that there's real affection for these characters.
Yes.
As we go through each of their stories, we love them, and we love the people that we know that are like them. And it's definitely an affectionate teasing. And readers have responded to that really well.
Yes.
Now, you could have set this in a ward in North America, a ward with very familiar culture, but you made the very interesting choice of setting it in a ward in Eastern Europe. So can you tell me just a little bit about, the nature of these stories, the place that they're in? That's size.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, the idea here, with that idea of we wanted to tell a story, as Nicole said, of an entire ward, of a congregation, not just of an individual, and have that whole ensemble of everyone in each other's business and mixed into each other's lives. And we wanted it to be a humor that could address big and difficult topics and point out some places where, there are things that are uncomfortable, but in a way that was always welcoming and loving rather than critical or mean-spirited. And in order to do that, really the breakthrough that started off this project was the idea of drawing on the traditions of Jewish humor and Yiddish literature that James and I grew up with and that Nicole appreciates a great deal and has studied as well. And trying to draw that same type of humor, which is very affectionate and very much, willing to poke fun at problems in the community and at foibles that we often see in attempting to live together, but in a way that is very loving and very dedicated and very, very much proud of being part of this people and this history. And we wanted to give LDS readers a taste of that experience of the long history of Jewish literature and folklore and Yiddish literature in particular. And the stories of Chelm, the wisdom of Chelm, as it's phrased in Yiddish, are a folklore tradition going back several centuries that allows Jewish writers to engage with these discussions of community and of the sometimes backwards logic that can come from our communal endeavor to care for each other.
So explain to me the idea of the Village of Fools. What is that idea? How does that work in storytelling?
Yeah, so and lots of different folklore traditions have this, but Chelm is the city of fools for Eastern European Jews. And the idea is we all know someone and at some time probably have been someone who's had a somewhat peculiar way of looking at things or approaching problems, and comes to somewhat outlandish conclusions. And the way that Chelm works is to absolutely concentrate that experience. So everyone in Chelm has this very particular logic to the way they approach the world. For LDS readers familiar with American picture books and not with Jewish folklore, a touch point that may be helpful is Amelia Bedelia. If you're familiar with her, right? The person who takes everything very literally and thus all sorts of wordplay goes over her head, right? She hears about someone running for office, for example, and thinks that it's actually a foot race, right? Instead of an election. And so Chelm is somewhat like that, but if instead of one very literally minded, goofy person, you had 100 of them all bumping into each other and, expanding their misinterpretations on top of each other.
And a lot of these stories do come not just from the logic, because we did play around a lot with that, with how would that interact with members of the church. But we also, there is this drawing directly from the Chelm stories. So in the introduction, James tells about the angel who trips on a small hill in Poland and drops the rest of the bag of the village idiots. And that's how we get them all concentrated in Poland. And that's why the, Chelm is its own thing. But we see later in The Church Comes to Chelm that we're drawing from the story, from an original story of, children turning a sleeping Chelm citizen's shoes the other way so that he thinks he's gone away, and goes the opposite direction and isn't sure where he goes, turns back to Chelm, thinks it's Chelm too, and these sorts of things. That's actually inspired by one of the old stories. But we did want to put our own twist on it. And actually one of the really early things, as we were sitting in our sunroom and making up stories, we were talking about things like, isn't it weird that we use the phrase, getting married in the church? Like, and what that means, like, how would somebody from Chelm respond to that? And we just started shooting off different ideas, like, what does it mean to get married in the church? And a lot of those different ideas became the discussion of the ward council on, what it means to get married in the church. And so a lot of that was the three of us playing around with how would this Chelm logic, this sort of tilted way of seeing things, how would this affect a ward council? How would this affect the way people approach these idioms and strange things that we say? And so we're using that tradition of these Chelm stories as a way to say, here's some weirdness that we encounter as Latter-day Saints, and playing around with that.
Yeah. And it goes through, how would members in Chelm pay tithing? How would they, handle the change to 2-hour church? What is the Chelm Sunday school like? What happens with the Chelm Ward choir when the young women of Chelm go on girls' camp? What's their girls' camp like? What about when the deacons of Chelm go to collect fast offerings? And so on and so forth.
Just charming stories. I loved bringing reminding me of all the stories. I really enjoyed reading these. Nicole, do you have a story or a section of a story that you'd like to read for us?
Actually, I did want to read a little bit from the Chelm Ward Choir, which Mattathias just brought up for us. So, the Chelm Ward Choir is one of these shorter stories, but I think it's one that we've all experienced in our own way. I appreciate it on a personal level because my dad was choir director for several years, but they also did activities and road shows, which, Chelm is late enough that we don't have the Chelm Road Show, which I would have loved to have seen, but, that was during the communist era. So, but I wanted to read a little bit from the Chelm Ward Choir. Sister Leah Cantor had one of the most challenging callings, perhaps in all the church. Many choir directors had put up with people singing in different keys, but in the Chelm Ward Choir, singers were frequently on a completely different hymn. No amount of cues or reminders to sing the same song seemed to make a difference. It was just their way. In matters of argumentation and debate, there was a saying, 2 Jews, 3 views. In Chelm Ward choir practices, where people sang whatever combination of words and melodies they could call up from their uneven memories, it was 2 saints, 3 songs. Still, Sister Cantor had tried to unify the group. They needed some sort of harmony. Half the joy of being in choir was different voices meeting. So if a choir member did not want to sing Now Let Us Rejoice, she might nudge them into bringing the words of another song, like The Spirit of God, into the same melody. It was important that choir members have a good experience because in a church run upon unpaid labor, choir was one of the few truly volunteer positions. Sister Cantor might be called of God whether she was interested or not, but her singers needed to feel drawn in. So I'm going to skip a little bit so we can get to all the ways that we get the mashup here. She tried all creatures of our God and King with hens and goats being brought in. So that didn't quite work. She tried, Israel, God is calling, but it would always lead into welcome, welcome, Sabbath morning. But really, who can tell the difference for that? So on the great and terrible day of their performance came. Little Brindle Fisher, the choir's youngest member, froze halfway up the aisle with stage fright. But after checking to see if she still wanted to perform, Lennell scooped her up just like a lamb to carry her to the stand. Brindle stood there stiff and ready to whisper the words. Fair enough, Leah Cantor thought. When many are called, it's all right if a few get frozen. Though she couldn't help but feel a little of that same petrifying nervousness as she glanced from Belka at the organ to the unfocused faces of her singers, the feeling fled as she lifted her arms to conduct. The men's voices rang deep and resonant through the chapel as they sang, Israel, Israel, Sabbath morning, and welcome, welcome, God is calling. On the second line, or third as they saw fit, the sisters came in with, Now we rest from lands of woe and calling thee from every care. And then 3 miracles happened. Just for one glorious moment, everyone in the choir sang in the exact same key. And old Israel Lewitzatang, I can't say the names as well as James, sorry, who always slept through sacrament meetings, suddenly stirred, blinked, rose up, and looked around, as if for the first time anyone could remember. The phone in the bishop's office began to ring. Sister Cantor smiled. She had always wondered what God's audible voice would sound like. So I love that piece just because of the choir singing its own glorious number and being able to really embrace that. I think that's one of the things that we lose when we're, the Miralist Schwartzes trying so hard for things to be perfect. That we have Sister Cantor stepping back and saying, we're going to do what we can do. So
it's a great touch that her name is Cantor.
It is definitely on purpose.
It's very fun.
There are a lot of jokes.
Some of the jokes I was like, they talk about dad jokes, but I tell Mattathias that he is so guilty of uncle jokes that we need to call him Uncle Jokes. Because some of the jokes I was like, Matt, we can't put that in there. That is too grown worthy. But yes, Sister Cantor made it in.
Yeah. What character in the book do you think is most based on yourself?
I know the answer to this one.
Okay. Who's that and why?
Well, for one, it's Flivver Gretola. And I don't love it because there are things she does that I'm like, do that? I don't know that I would do that. And then there are things she does I was like, oh, I would definitely do that. But actually the primary story, The Wise Men, is very much based on my experience having been called as primary president last January, so 2023, after serving my entire adult life in Relief Society and Gospel Doctrine, mostly with teaching. So it was really weird and kind of a shock for me. And so, yeah, that's one that was actually really fun because we got to play around with like, okay, what are kids like in primary? Okay, what would they be doing? Okay, how would they react to this? And just playing around with that a lot. So I definitely feel that sense of, oh, I'm kind of trying to figure out how to get those kids to be involved and not wait, swirl around like fish on the floor. So.
And having the children in the book, so involved in the book, made it a lot of fun, especially all the young women on the camp out, but also the primary kids, the young men as well. How about you, Mattathias? Who's the character that you think is based on your own?
I'm not sure. I don't think I appear in the book as directly as James and Nicole, who are, of course, Heschel and Gretel. I think if there's a character who probably has the most of my life experience put in, it's actually the Deacon Gimple Peretz. Who,
I never thought of that.
Yeah, in order to deal with the difficulties of his life, turns first to studying the more obscure passages of the Talmud, and then to Jewish history, and then to communism. And, always has his head in a book to come up with some sort of new argument.
To avoid having to walk around all day on Sunday to delivering the past offerings.
Yeah.
Gathering the past offerings.
Yeah.
Tries to appeal to all these authorities.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great story. Could you also introduce your co-author? Tell us who your co-author is and explain the relationship between the three of you, or some of our viewers may not know that.
Oh, James Goldberg is our co-author, and he did do most of the actual writing because you can hear it with James Goldberg's voice. And he is my husband. We've been married nearly 15 years, and is, I know, can you believe it? Time flies.
I can. I've been here for all of it. So
yeah. Well, and Mattathias is James's brother. So.
And how is James like the Heschel character?
It's the absent-mindedness.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. I don't want to sound mean talking about it. Okay. So I just want to be clear about this because I love his character. Like, I love Heschel, and Heschel is a what?
Heschel is marvelous. Heschel is very much the soul of the Chelm First Ward. He's the one who brought the church to Chelm.
And he brings people together, which is very much what James does. Is he brings people together around, things that he's very passionate in. I like to tell people I'm married into Mormon literature. Like, this was never my passion project, but he was like, oh, you're a good editor. So I became a co-editor on the Mormon Liblets, and I started editing all of his books and, ended up teaching literature of the Latter-day Saints at BYU and just things like that, where I become very enmeshed and done presentations for AML and, pieces before because of that, because James has that spirit that just gathers people around his causes, like Heschel. But is he somebody who would maybe wander? Yes, he is. When we were dating, I was divorced and a single mother and very cautious. And I started asking all of James's family members and friends that I would meet, tell me what's wrong with him. and it was really good because in 15 years of marriage, I haven't been surprised. But one thing was we met in graduate school at BYU, and their aunt, Sunita Gill, she had said to me, she said, I was a little bit worried because he was just doing theater and just working odd jobs and, all this stuff. But now that he's in graduate school, I feel like he's got more direction. And so part of me thinks of that with Heschel literally having no direction. But he's also just this wonderful person people are drawn to and really appreciate.
Matt,
do you want to add anything, Matt?
The moment where Heschel walks into the ward council meeting 30 minutes late is also a very James Goldberg story.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Matt, tell us about your and James's interest and background in Jewish literature.
Yeah. So James and we come from a very unique family. When I'm describing my family, I generally have to start with my grandparents because everything makes much more sense once you know about my four grandparents who, for their own separate reasons, all ended up at Brigham Young University in the 1950s. First, there's my mother's parents, my mother's mother, who grew up in Mexico and Texas as the daughter of members of families from the Mormon colonias in Mexico, who had remained in Mexico after the revolution when a lot of the population came to the United States to get away from the chaos of the revolution. And then my mother's father is an immigrant from the Punjab in Mexico, from a town.
India.
In India. Yeah. There's no Punjab in Mexico. There is Punjab in both India and Pakistan. But the partition was not sufficiently complicated to put part of it in Mexico. Sorry for the Chelm moment there. But yes, a farmer's son from rural India, who upon coming to the U.S. and converting to Mormonism and transferring to BYU, actually found that he had a great deal in common with a farmer's daughter from rural Mexico. And then my father's parents, who were his mother, a rebellious Jack Mormon girl who was doing her best to get away from her Mormon parents and was sent by BYU to, get her on the straight and narrow path. And she beelined in a straight and narrow direction for the first non-Mormon man she could find on campus, who happened to be our paternal grandfather, Arthur Isaac Goldberg, who is an Ashkenazi Jew and agnostic, whose family came to the United States from Romania in the early 20th century. And so our family history brings together, the Yiddish literature of these folk tales and LDS experiences around the world, and just a lot of different parts and pieces of global culture and of religion. Our mother's father grew up in the Sikh religion, which developed in Punjab in the 1400s through the 1700s, and then, only found Christianity and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in particular after his immigration to the United States at the age of 19. That was, the first time that farm boy from rural India had heard of Judaism or Christianity or the Bible and New Testament and things like that. And so we're the products of this big interfaith collision. And part of what we wanted to do with this book was offer a flavor of that experience to anybody else who wanted to read.
And we got a couple of years ago, Nicole wrote the Bollywood Lovers Club. Yeah, Bollywood Lovers Club.
He co-wrote that with Jancy Patterson. Yes.
Right. So we got that side of his family in that book, and then we kind of get the other side of your family in this book.
Yep. And that's a young adult romance set in high school between Mormon boy who has a grandfather like ours from Punjab, who's become LDS, and Sikh girl who's recently moved from California to Ohio. And so it's an homage to a lot of our growing up years, and definitely to that connection especially.
Another great book. So another great part of this book is the drawings, the illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
About those?
Yeah, we were very lucky. So this book started, as Nicole has alluded to, in James and Nicole's house in 2018, where I would often come over to talk about literature with them in different things. And we were talking about Mormon literature, and we hit on this idea of what if we wrote a set of Chelm folk tales for Latter-day Saints. And then throughout 2018 and 2019, we spent a lot of time in James and Nicole's sunroom at the back of their house, which is a lovely room with glass walls. Don't worry, they don't throw any stones in there. And just brainstormed and outlined and wrote this whole list of the different, the ward directory of all the members of the Chelm ward and their neighbors and people who connect with them. And then in late 2019, I got into a serious car crash that left me with a traumatic brain injury, and that kind of slowed things down. And then a global pandemic started, and that complicated things too. And so it took us several more years to get things to a stage where it was then ready to move forward. But as we were moving towards publication and also serialization with the wonderful people at Wayfair, we were, wanting to have some sort of illustrations for that, and had the great good fortune of the amazing illustrator Dave Habben agreeing to come on as illustrator for all of these stories and to do original art for each chapter of the book. And what he came up with and the way he engaged with the themes in the book is really quite amazing and astounding. And so Yeah.
James and I had met David Habben in 2017. So not long before this project started. And I was just blown away by the way that he used line work and did his illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
And he had just finished his MFA project, and it was just gorgeous. And so when we were talking, because Wayfair said, yes, we would love to serialize the tales of the Chelm First Ward, I said it would be awesome if we could get David Habben. And David Habben later said, and so James reached out to him, and James has gone to and been a guest speaker in his classes and other things. So they have a good working relationship, and wrote a poem about one of the prints that we have of David's and stuff like that. And so he reached out to him, and David later said that, you know, if James asked him to do it, then he'll do it. So here we were. I was like so nervous. Like, do you think we could get him to do it? And he was like, "Oh, I'll do whatever James asks me to do."
Yeah.
So that was really lovely. And we actually worked a lot with him because the cover image, which I'll just hold up right here, the cover image, which is so beautiful and has our angel tripping and spilling the bag of fools. The village idiot, he had done such an initial, just detailed piece, and I loved it, and I said, this is amazing. There is no way he's going to be able to do that for every piece in the interior at the schedule that they want to publish these for serialization on Wayfair. And so James and I, just gave him feedback and said, okay, try this. This is working. This is great. And after that initial piece, and after kind of going through and just saying, do what you feel is most, that you're able to accomplish the most. Like, don't do more than you feel like you can do for this publication schedule. And so we found, he came up with this style, and I love the geometric and the line work and the things that he does. And he did say that he wanted it to feel a little bit like the old illustration in The Friend, so they kind of had that feeling. And I think it's just gorgeous work, and I love what he did. And I'm so impressed that he was able to do so many illustrations. They're just beautiful pieces.
Yeah, there's like, I don't know, about 30 chapters or so, and there's a piece for everything.
Yeah. And I've spent a lot of time reading through and looking at old Yiddish language newspapers that a lot of these, Chelm folk tales were published in. And the style of these illustrations also really reminds me of the cartoons from those old newspapers.
Yeah.
I think David did an amazing job of capturing the real spirit of these stories on both the LDS and the Jewish sides of that artistic spectrum.
With his own unique style. Because he just has such a fingerprint the way that he does.
Yes.
I just love his style.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw a piece of David's at James and Nicole's house, and it was from a series that he did where he was illustrating music by illustrating these moving, dancing figures.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely stunning, the level of movement and time captured in these still images.
It's fantastic. We can sing David Habben's praises all day.
They're good.
Yes.
Let me just clarify.
Amen.
So you mentioned that it was that several of these stories have been serialized in Wayfair magazine,
Mhm.
This is this online and in print magazine that started out maybe not quite 2 years ago, and doing great stuff with Mormon literature among many other things. But this, I don't think I've seen. I don't know when's the last time I've seen an LDS piece like this published in this kind of periodical format. But it's only, I know, what do they do? Maybe 8 of the chapters out of the 30 chapters. So you're just getting a taste.
They've actually been doing all of it. They've kept going.
Oh, they're going to do all of them.
They kept going. Yeah, they're still publishing them.
Oh, I bet.
It's on their blog, and it won't be in print because the print is through by Common Consent Press, BCC Press. But it is on the Wayfair blog, and they've continued to serialize them.
Okay, so everybody go get a
CDs online.
Get a taste of the stories and the illustrations online, and then buy the print book from BCC Press.
Yeah, and you will want to have your own copy after exploring these. If they catch your fancy, they really, really will.
Well, and I've heard a lot of people responding to this and saying, this is the character I relate to the most. And this is, the story. Sometimes people will make jokes like, were you listening in on my ward council? Or, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like these are stories, even though they are set in, former communist Poland, that they're very, very relatable to the kinds of things that we run into as Latter-day Saints.
And one of my favorite reviews that we've gotten was somebody who said, when I first started the stories, I was cringing every time with the secondhand embarrassment of all these ridiculous things that happen, and how much I recognize that from my own religious life and from my community. And then the further and further I got, the more, instead of cringing, I was just filled with this incredible love for the goofiness, right? And it was this liberating for her to really be able to look at the foible of the community without that sense of shame and embarrassment, and instead see it in a positive. But yeah, okay. All of
we're losing your volume, Matt. So.
Oh, sorry.
You kind of cut out there at the end.
Yeah. Where did I cut out? I can repeat myself.
I think we got most of it, but
okay. But yeah, we really hope that that's an experience you'll have yourself as you engage with these stories, that you may start with some embarrassment, but that by the end, you'll have a great feeling of pride and affection, both for the Chelm Ward and for your own religious community and your own experience and your own foolishness, even.
Yeah, and I really love how it runs the gamut from just basic ward business things, just basic bureaucracy stuff, to real issues of faith and people's relationship with God and with with the change in their lives that happens from connecting with the divine to the church. I really appreciated that. Seems like this kind of a centerpiece of it was the girls' camp experience in the middle, 4 or 5 chapters about that. Is that you have seared experiences, Nicole, from girls' camp?
I am the one of the 3 authors who actually went to girls' camp, so I can claim some of these experiences. What is girls' camp like? James has been a priesthood leader at girls' camp, but it's not quite the same. So one of the things, actually, this is my favorite. My college roommate and one of my closest friends, we've known each other for 27 years. She and her daughter came over one night and were telling us the story of how her daughter, who was one of the junior leaders, the junior counselors for girls camp went up and was scratching and making bear noises on the tent. And so this actually came, and the character is definitely influenced by my friend's daughter. But in this case, it was really sweet because, she was going around their tent and making these noises, and she could hear the girls just kind of freaking out. And then the leader decided she was going to come out and face the bear and chase the bear off for the sake of her girls. And like, it's a really sweet story of how brave and selfless this leader is. And also, of course, feeling terribly guilty for scaring somebody that bad. So, of course, things change in Golden and the Three Bears, and instead, she eats all the food and gets sick, and it goes differently. But that really was, that's one of the fun things is you can find the weirdest things happening in girls' camp. So we had long talks about, okay, what were the things? And I was like, oh, well, we need an inspirational hike, because the inspirational hike was like the moment where we're all supposed to have, these spiritual breakthroughs, and really it ends up just being silly. The general murmur is actually from the pioneers, and James could tell me who it was that said this. Do you remember, Matt? Because I can't hold names in my head.
I think it's one of the Orsons.
Okay.
There are lots of Orsons in early.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Orson Pratt or Orson of Whitney, but one of them had said we need to appoint a general murmurer in each company so that everybody stops complaining and one person is designated as the general murmurer. And so I really love the way that we get, and we're like, well, who would be the least likely person to be the general murmurer? The one who doesn't ever complain and always just does whatever anybody tells her to do. So
that's her job now, and so she takes it very seriously to do the complaints correctly.
So
yeah, she has to magnify her calling, right? That's a very important LDS obligation.
And I do have to say, it was really, really hard. That was actually one of the trickiest things to get with Chelm logic. How can we have people, the other girls, give her instructions and have it get completely messed up? Because like when you're interpreting something, you're not thinking, how can I make this messed up? You're thinking, how can I make this clear? So it was really hard as we're talking through this, trying to say, okay, if she says this, what are the 5 ways that it can be interpreted? And we wanted to kind of stack it like the yes, no, and these different responses. And so that actually on a writing level was really challenging to get into the characters' heads, where it's like, how can she do this exactly wrong? And how could it be interpreted exactly wrong? But it was really fun.
A concept that comes up when Heschel first brings the church to Chelm, and comes up several times throughout, is this idea of repairing the world, and that this is the thing about the church that appeals to him, and kind of through him appeals to a lot of the other people who convert and join. What can you expand a little bit on that idea and how you see LDS forms of Christianity doing that?
Yeah. So this is initially a Jewish idea that's very important in Judaism, in particular in the Hasidic Judaism that did develop in this part of Eastern Europe as a particularly strong communal form of Judaism that has some interesting resonances and parallels with the LDS experience. And so repairing the world, in Hebrew, it's tikkun olam, right? Tikkun being the repair and olam being the world. And there are lots of spiritual approaches to it, from some very mystical ones where, prayer is the biggest thing you can do to repair the world, to some very pragmatic ones, right? Where taking care of your community and feeding the hungry and, bringing meals to people who are sick, that's the biggest kind of tikkun olam. And I think Mormonism, in its very deep communalism and in this desire to build a society where there are no poor among them and things like this, has a very strong tikkun olam spirit, and has this communal sharedness that's really key to the way that that's expressed in Jewish life as well.
I loved how you really took the Jewishness of these characters seriously. It wasn't just just kind of a way to put the Mormons into a different place, and just kind of the humor of seeing Mormonism in a different place. But you took their tradition seriously, and what it means for them to become Christian and accept baptism, which was something has this kind of horrendous history for Jews.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff was, I thought, really well done.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. I think that was another one of our Mormons Christian was another one of our early discussions, that, not wanting to be labeled as Christian because Christians were oppressors to Jewish people throughout Europe, especially, and so it felt like one of those things that we did want to still keep very much that tradition, that these are converts from a Jewish tradition, and that they still, just like Mattathias and James, have this deep connection. I mean, every year we celebrate Passover in our family. I actually had a really funny experience where a friend that I knew online had created an art piece for me that was Christmas themed. And then she saw my last name because she knew my first name, and she saw my last name and was suddenly like, oh no, does she celebrate Christmas? And it's like, well, yeah, we do both, and my children are growing up with that same sense that, we have, our traditions for, that honor the Jewish heritage and Jewish traditions, and that we also have, our faith in the gospel, but that they go together and they work together really well. I mean, the gospel, like Joseph Smith restored the ancient church. It's the same church and as we have in the Old Testament. And that's what's, really resonant with our characters, is that they see, oh, okay, this is a continuation. There's a little bit more, but we're still living our lives as Jews as well as Mormons.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't want to paper over some of that discomfort, right? There have been big issues between Jews and Christians historically, with the way that Christians have treated Jews, and with the anti-Semitism that's been directed at Jewish communities. And there have been issues between Jewish people and the LDS Church, with issues like baptisms for the dead for Holocaust victims. And we wanted to not paper over those in our way. We're exploring our experience as people who do have a shared heritage, where we see both sides and where we have sort of lived with a fusion of different traditions. But we didn't want to shy away from some of the uncomfortable parts of that experience. And that does really feed into this very Chelmish story that I think captures a lot of the humor of Chelm, but also some of the deep seriousness that this is able to engage with, which is in the story that Nicole just alluded to, that's near the end of the collection, but that's called Are Mormons Christian? And of course, for American Mormons, there's this big history of experiencing persecution from other Christians and being told that we're not really Christian, right? The Latter-day Saints aren't really Christian for whatever reasons. And that's something that Latter-day Saints have often rushed to respond to with, no, we really are Christian people because, we worship Jesus Christ and we, have these very core parts of our identity that are around Jesus. But for the Mormons of Chelm, there's a very different automatic instinctive response, which is, how dare you insult us by suggesting that we're just Christian, right? Christians are the people who, run the parliament and run all the big companies and make life hard for Jews. And that's the way it's always been. And clearly, if you can see, look at Mormon history, Mormons, received a covenant and had an exodus across, the wilderness into a land of promise and all these different things. And so clearly the only possible conclusion for the Mormons of Chelm is that it's very clear that Mormons are Jews. That the legacy of Christianity is not a legacy that they want to be associated with, and not a label that they want to claim. And we're at the same time, right? There's a humor in this, right? It is the Chelm backwards logic to our expectations, but it's also a very serious quandary about what is the legacy of the way that Christians have behaved towards Jews over the past 2,000 years, and how should Christians wrestle with that legacy and with the experience that is left for non-Christian communities around the world.
And I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, because in no way is the book ever criticizing and saying, that like, there is fault, that there is someone to blame. It's all very loving, because it's all about having this sense of belonging. If you are a Mormon Jew, then you belong in this community, and you belong in this ward. And I think that's really what it's about, more than, a lot of issues come up. Well, and I think in every single one, this is probably the heaviest one, but in every single issue, it comes up that, we want to show that at its core, this is all about having that sense of belonging and being a part of something greater than yourself.
Yeah. And while we point a lot to the foolishness of Chelm, there also really is, as the Jewish proverb about Chelm goes, the wisdom of Chelm as well. And here, the wisdom is in the way that the members of this community love and accept and stand up for each other. Across their differences, across differences of belief and identity and experience and approach to their religion, consistently, they're there for each other and they care for each other.
Yeah. And I think that's something that you find in close religious communities. And I think that's why it works so well to have, these Mormon Jews in Chelm, because they know how to be a community. We know how to be a community. We are, we are all together and unified through our faith. and and through, this identity that we have.
Yeah. And our strength is in community, not in being free from foolishness, right? Not in getting everything right.
Definitely not in free from
Not always getting along. Not in being on the same page about everything, but in being willing to stay here with each other and care for each other across all of these differences and across all of the foolishness and goofiness and ridiculousness that we each get up to.
Definitely.
Nicole, is there another reading you'd like to do to close this out?
Oh, to close us out reading. Let me figure that out. Okay. Well, I feel like the closing out, I should probably go toward the end, and most of my bookmarks are for the beginning.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I should have thought of that. Okay. I think I'm going to go to Like a Foyer is Burning, which, by the way, is
Yes.
a Utah way of pronouncing that when I guess most people say foyer. But foyer makes it funnier, so I'm going to say foyer. Excuse me. All right. So we have Stefan who marries into Chelm. We've been following them, but I want to start on the second page of the story. In the Chelm Ward, they practiced the same religion, but the culture was just different enough that he felt easily out of step. The hymns were familiar, but the singing was strange. The testimonies never seemed to fit the familiar grooves in his mind, even though he recognized the convictions. He'd sometimes finish sacrament meeting feeling like someone who'd had a stroke and was once again learning to make sense of language. And then came the second hour. In Elders' Quorum, President Gronum's tone always managed to make him feel guilty. But for the life of him, Stefan couldn't figure out what he was feeling guilty for. And Sunday school, he came to class by reflex. And by reflex, he started the scriptures from what was apparently now the wrong side of the book. It made him think of Jonah and all those poor lost Gentiles in Nineveh. The way everyone else so easily turned pages, he wondered briefly if he could still tell his left hand from his right. Stefan was part of the covenant people, yes, but he also felt so foreign here. Some weeks he just needed a breath. Shayna had a calling in primary, so she would head off to class, and he would find himself hesitating in the hall, none sitting in the foyer. Zelda Gottstein was always there, but she didn't feel a need to speak. The first time he skipped class, they both just sat in the quiet. Without word, there was no sense. Without sense, there was no nonsense. It was nice. Sometimes Zelda brought sweets to share after the meetings were over, and she'd let Stefan get a little head start. Over food, they'd chat about nothing in particular. Communication went much more smoothly. Stefan realized when you didn't have a goal and wasting time, that was a universal language. Soon Stefan got quite used to skipping the second hour. He didn't really miss Elders' Quorum. This foyer quorum was better. Different people would drift through each week, and he'd see a different side of them. Yet he and Zelda were the regulars. One week, he finally thought to ask her how she ended up as the space's anchor. Why did she sit in the foyer all the time? Zelda looked off in the distance for a moment, then began. It started when Hava, that's my granddaughter, Heschel and Gretel's girl, learned how to say amen. When you're that young, every word has a use. She'd say more to ask for food, mama to ask for comfort, and amen when she thought the person should be done talking and go sit down. Whenever he felt too long, and it doesn't take long for most talks to feel too long, she would say it out loud. She would say it loud and clear like a command, and if the speaker kept going, she would say it again, louder and louder. Amen, amen, amen. Here to keep her quiet? Stefan asked. Only if the speaker didn't get the message, Zelda said. I didn't want her to get frustrated and give up. It's good for a child like that to keep her faith in language. All right, so I'm going to skip a little bit because we've got that, and then we'll go back down here. She talks about all the different stains and crumbs and tears and different things in here.
In the couch.
In the tear in the couch. I'll go to the tear in the couch. So then Zelda stood up off her usual couch to show him a small tear in the fabric behind the very chair he was sitting on. She told him it had been made by a goat Leah Cantor brought in for a choral number, which we saw before. On the wall inside the windowsill, she showed him faded crayon marks, which never quite washed all the way off. This faded blue one from Hava, the trace of yellow from Bina, this big dark swirl from Dinah Peretz just last week. Every stain, tear, or dent had a story down to the drop of juice spilled by Elijah the prophet on his way out of the blind beggar's ward's Passover feast. As she spoke, Stefan felt an overpowering sensation, one that was familiar, one that would nevertheless always be strange. It radiated out into the room, the spirit rushing through the years like a mighty wind, translating this world for him, translating him into it. Zelda looked over at him quizzically. Stefan leaned down and fished under the couch until he found an orange crayon. Then he pulled back the curtain on the windowsill and made his mark on the wall. And I have heard several people say they relate a lot to Stefan. He is the outsider in Chelm. And I love that Stefan has decided right there in the foyer, in his foyer quorum and foyer worship, that he is now a part of that story.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Matt and Nicole.
Thank you, Andrew, for having us.
Everybody go out and get this book. I highly recommend it. And thank
Me too.
And thank you to James out there for all the work that he...
I will pass on the message to him.
And thank you to our listeners for listening to the Dialogue Book Report. This show is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, a collective of independent podcasts who promote inquiry into all aspects of the LDS tradition. It includes wonderful shows like Angels and Seer Stones, a Latter-day Saint folklore podcast, in which folklorists Christine and Christopher Blythe examine the lived religion of Latter-day Saints, the stories we tell, and the beliefs we debate. The show is produced and edited by Daniel Foster Smith, who also provides the music. Our content manager is Emily Jensen. To hear more, go to dialoguejournal.com.
I'm Taylor Petrie, editor of Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought, and this is Dialogue Out Loud.
My eyelashes were subtly coated in matte black mascara. On my cheeks, a light dusting of dusty rose-colored blush powder. Just enough that I could feel comfortable and almost myself.
On Tuesday, my visiting teacher said she knew I was really busy at work and brought over a casserole for dinner, the chief ingredient of which was zucchini.
Maybe it isn't the Lamanite who needs to forsake the incorrect traditions of our forefathers. Maybe it's the belief of racial hierarchy that we need to forsake.
Never learn to play the organ, the old woman told me. You might get a different calling from time to time. But make no mistake, once you get on the path of becoming a ward organist, that's what you'll be until you die.
Each year, we bring you even more great fiction, personal essays, and poetry taken from the pages of our quarterly journal. We couldn't do this without your support, so thank you for reading, listening, and supporting Dialogue with your donations, subscriptions, or by simply leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. For more content like this, or to get involved with Dialogue events, go to dialoguejournal.com.
Dialogue Podcast Network.